Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this new Nexum webinar. So today we will return to the basics of change management. So we will clarify the origin of change management, define it in simple terms, and finally look at the famous 5 fundamental principles on which the Prosci methodology is based. So change management is born out of the following regular observation. We have often seen projects delivered on time, within budget, and in a perfectly functional state. And yet, a month later, we find that the expected benefits have not been realized. So this happens in all kinds of projects, programs, or portfolios, such as mergers and acquisitions, IT system implementation, or cultural transformation projects, for example. But why is this? Well, it stems from a common confusion about the notion of the benefits realization of a project. So indeed, the vast majority of projects produces results that change or create capabilities that will enable the realization of the desired benefits. But just because they enable them does not mean they are realized. So in practice, a benefit is defined as a measurable improvement resulting from the adoption and use of the project deliverable that is perceived as a benefit by a stakeholder. So let's take a simple example to clarify and just to be reassured, because the webinar has not yet started. This is just an intro for you. So let's imagine you are responsible for the development of a new product. You develop it according to the required specification, on time and within budget. As a result, the project deliverable is perfect. However, depending on whether your product sells or not, the realization of the benefit will be more or less achieved. And we can repeat this story by replacing the product with a new software installation or a new organization following a merger or the digitization of a business lines, etc. So I'm sure that these examples will ring a bell for you. Benefits realization is also often confused with return on investments. While return on investment focuses on the tangible value usually expressed in monetary terms to justify the project, benefits realization is much broader, as it is about achieving some form of benefits for key stakeholders. So intuitively, you may already understand that the missing element in the picture is intimately linked to the human aspect of change in any project. And this is where change management comes in. As you have understood, it is not enough to deliver a project for it to produce its benefits. You have to activate the people the project concerns. And this is what you will learn today. So today's webinar will be given by Morten Kampendessen. So if you follow our webinars regularly, you probably already know Morten. But for the others, please let me briefly introduce Morten. So he's one of the founding members of Nexum Group. And since 2014, Morten advises, trains, coaches, and works with the national and international organizations in the field of change management. He also holds a Master of Sciences degree in psychology. And before becoming one of the most recognized change management experts in Europe, he started his career in London as a financial analyst. So welcome to those of you who have just joined us and are trying to get on the train. So no worries, the webinar has not yet started. And just before we start, let me just give you some practical details about this webinar's conduct. So you can ask questions throughout the session by using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we will try to answer all of them at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical issues or questions, please use the chat button, and we will try to help you as much as we can. And likewise, if you want to share some ideas or experience about what is said during the session, please use the chat. So just before we start, and for those who just joined us, let me briefly summarize what you will learn today, because from my introduction, you have understood that this is an illusion to hope to obtain 100% of the benefits expected from a project if we ignore the human element of it. But luckily, this is the playing field of change management. So there are several theories on how to manage change, but only Prosci offers a methodology in the form of a structured process and a set of tools for leading the human side of change to achieve the benefits of any project. So today we will explore the 5 principles of Prosci's change management and establish a direct link between the human side of change and achieving the benefits of your project. So at the end of this session, we hope you will leave with a clear understanding of change management and the ambition to apply it to your future projects. So I wish you all an excellent webinar, and I will leave the floor now to Morten.
Thanks a lot, Diego, and welcome to this webinar that is on Friday, the 2nd of December. So we're approaching the end of the year, and I'm really happy that you've taken the time to spend with me on the next hour to talk about the 5 tenets of change management. The 5 tenets of change management is really a fundamental and basic understanding of how do we position change management well, so we can articulate the benefits of change management, so we can articulate why change management is important for the particular project that you are working on. So I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time out today. Before we begin, I just want to start with a very basic understanding of what is change management. And whenever we're asked about what is change management, we always share this one slide, which is the unified value proposition. The unified value proposition essentially is a very simple message. And what it says is that whenever we do a change, there is always a reason for that change. There's always a business reason. We'll talk about that in this webinar as well. But every time we have a project, there are always a technical side, and the technical side is really there to design, develop, and deliver the right solution for the reason that you decided to make a change in the first place. So it could be to grab that opportunity, or it could be to avoid that risk, or whatever it is that you're trying to fix with this change. Anyway, there is a technical side, and the technical side is there to design, develop, and deliver that right solution for that. But also, every time that we have a change, we have a people side. We need to have an organization that is ready to adapt, engage, and use the solution when we develop it. And we need both of these two in order to be successful. And what we can see is that people actually do understand that. They do understand that there is a connection between the people side of change and then getting the results and the outcomes. So if you just ask people, if you ask steering group members, if you ask CEOs, if you ask project managers, if you ask HR, do you understand that it's really important that the organization needs to be ready to adapt and use this solution? Most people will say yes, and that makes easy sense for the project that I am at. Well, then the question is, if that is so clear, why is it that you have not applied change management maybe on the project, or haven't applied it enough, or maybe started too late? And sometimes that is because we need to explain the core principles behind change management, and that's what this webinar is about. So the agenda for this webinar that we have today is it's going to be defining a position in context using the 5 tenets to build that understanding of those connections. So when we bring context into the conversation, we begin to focus on the audience. What do they care about? What keeps them up at night? What gets them up in the morning? And so with the 5 tenets, we're going to allow us to basically define and position change management really well. We're also going to apply change management, the 5 tenets, to one of your initiatives. And that is going to help you make this become a little bit more easy to understand. So how are you going to use this framework? And for this to work, you're going to need 3 things. A blank sheet of paper, you're going to need a pen, and then you're also going to consider an initiative, or think of an initiative. An initiative you think about can be one as we're walking through these 5 tenets. So it might be an initiative that you're working on right now. You just came out of a meeting about it, or maybe it's an initiative that you worked on a couple of years ago. That really doesn't matter, because then you're just working about it. Whatever, but I need you to have an initiative of a project in mind, so you can work on that as we go through. Anyway, so this is what we're going to go through in today's webinar. The 5 tenets were first introduced in change management, the people side of change, that came out in 2003, and also the 2nd edition that came out in 2012. And in chapter 1 of both of these are called Why Change Management. But it's interesting, in the first one, it was really a textbook definition with a list of consequences of poor change management. But in the second edition, there was a rewrite, and basically the first chapter was rewritten. So it was easier to advance and simplify the case for change management by adding context. And that's the context that you will find in these 5 tenets. So a tenet is it's a principle, it's a belief that we hold to be true. And the 5 tenets are really sort of complex for a very simple, logical, and compelling way of articulating what change management is and why it matters. So tenet number 1 is that we change for a reason. Tenet number 2 is that organization requires individual change. And tenet number 3 is that organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. Tenet number 4 is change management is an enabling framework for managing the people side of change. And finally, tenet number 5 is we apply change management to realize the benefits and desired outcome for a change. Now, those are the 5 tenets. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect them together. Prosci also introduced 5 sort of plain language questions to go along with the tenets. So the tenets are those beliefs that we hold to be true, plain language questions introduced to get to the essence of the core of what it is that we're trying to explain to somebody. So for tenet number 1, we change for a reason. The plain language question is, why are we changing? Tenet number 2, organizational change requires individual change. The plain language question is, who has to do their job differently and how? Tenet number 3, organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. The plain language question is, how much of our outcomes depend on adoption and usage? Tenet number 4 is change management is an enabling framework for managing the people side of change. And the plain language question is, what will we do to support adoption and usage? And finally, tenet number 5, we apply change management to realize the benefits and desired outcomes of change. The plain language question is, how will driving adoption and usage improve results? So these are the plain language questions we're going to pull forward throughout the course of this webinar and basically look at how does that look. So we're going to deconstruct each of these in this webinar. I'll share with you a couple of thoughts, some visuals, some insights about how it works. And then I will have you take out that blank piece of paper and start to make the connections yourself. So I really hope that you are up for that. Anyway, so let's talk about some insights about the tenets, and then we'll get you out and talk about that. We talk about that change is really a movement out of a current state through a transition state to ultimately reach a future state. That's often how we talk about change when we talk about it in organizations. So we have 2 departments, we want to move to 1 department, so we want to merge them. Or we have a paper-based solution, we want to have an IT-based solution. Or we're moving away from an old CRM system to a new CRM system, or whatever it is. So there is basically a way of showing up right now that we're moving through to ultimately reach a different future. And there has been many different, so Arnold van Gennep was probably the first to talk about it in 3 different steps. He talks about it in the rites of passage, but there's been many other contributors to the discipline. So just to explain a little bit about many of the writings that's behind this sort of 3-step approach in terms of thinking about change. So we had, as I said, Van Gennep described as separation out of whatever previous stage of life you were in. So this is very much from a psychology point of view, and then going through let's say into incorporation, so stepping into that new phase of life, whether that's moving from childhood into adulthood or being single into being married or whatever. So he basically studied rites of passage around the world and really identified this in how these changes happened. Kurt Lewin famously also described how this is going from unfreezing through a moving phase to a refreezing phase. We had William Bridges gave us all kinds of insights into the psychological risks of stepping out of the ending, which he calls the current state, and he used the ending into a neutral zone and then into a new beginning. And actually a really interesting writing about that. We also had Beckett and Harris and Lemarche and Connor also talking about how we can move through the different phases. And finally, we had Ankerman and Anderson, Salerno and Brock also going through different stages, going from a red to a yellow to a green. So loss and doubt, discomfort and discovery, and into an understanding and integration. So having these three states of change is a way of thinking about change that has been around for many, many years. And that's also how we are talking about it now. And I'll probably maintain that it's a very simple, probably too simple way of thinking about it. And when you see it in organizations today, it doesn't feel like there is a current state, a transition, and a future state. It looks a lot more blurred. I know that there are many of these going on at the same time, and maybe it looks a little bit more like this map actually. So there are many current and transition and future state. But some of them are sort of traditional sequential, and some of them are iterative by nature, and I do get that. But what I do say is that if you look at them individually, if you look at the individual initiatives that we have in front of us, then you can think of them in terms of a current, transition, and future state. Even if it looks, when you are sitting in a department or in a company or in a team, it looks like there are so many things going on that it's impossible to separate them, then it still makes sense to do this. So I don't want to throw them out just because reality is that we got a lot of them going on at the same time. I still think that it makes good sense. I can see a couple of people have have some questions. I'll be very happy to answer questions in the end of this, and also Diego will answer some of them in the chat as we go along. And rest assured that I'll hang around and we'll talk about questions in the end. Anyway, so when you talk about that we change for a reason, which is tenet number one, then there are two sides of that reason that Prosci is building out in their approach to driving more successful outcomes. The right-hand side is the organizational benefits, and that's what the organization gains from implementing the change. So what's the problem? What's the opportunity that the organization is up against? Is that a problem or opportunity? Is a problem that is solved, or is it an opportunity realized? What are we going to benefit, and how will we benefit it? How will we ultimately going to know when these benefits are realized? So that's the organizational benefits. The other side of the coin is the project objectives. What does the project actually achieve? How does the project contribute to solving the problem? How does these solutions make realizing the opportunity that we're looking to realize? What is the project actually going to produce or enable, or how will we know if objectives have actually been achieved? My experience is that many times, a lot of times, organizations and initiatives will define one, but come up short with capturing both of these. So they might be very focused on what it is that the project is trying to achieve. So we're trying to install this new SAP system, and we want everybody to use it. That's the project objectives. But then failing to articulate clearly what it is that the organization is actually gaining. And part of our job is to help extract both the organizational benefits, so what the organization gains, but also the project objectives, what it is that the project is trying to achieve. We need to extract both of these from the senior leaders that we support in order to be successful. One more view in terms of where these reasons of a change come from. There is a lot of different sources of these triggers for change. And what you see here on this slide 13. So across the horizontal line, we have internal and external. And the vertical, you have those current conditions and you have the future goals. Because, you know, there are both current things happening in and continuous improvements and demands to do more with less and so on. But there are also external things going on, like the markets and economic shifts. We see that at the moment, customer demands, competitive threats. We also see new technologies and regulations and so on, some external things that are impacting our current condition. We also have triggers that live out in the future aspirations that we're trying to achieve as a result of undertaking or launching this initiative. Internally, those might be things like lower cost, high revenue, fewer errors, greater efficiency. So these are things that we internally would like to gain in the future. And externally, they may be more like a larger market share or more satisfied customers or less risk exposure. So these are some of the other reasons for change. What I think is important to say about tenet number one is there is always a reason for a change. Every initiative that you're looking at has a reason. So if you are implementing Microsoft Teams, then the project objectives is to launch Microsoft Teams, and you might have some KPIs around how many people engage with it, how much cross-divisional collaboration is there, how many people use it for 80% of their internal communication or whatever. But then you also have the organizational benefits. What is the organization trying to achieve with that project objectives? So making sure that we have both sides of the coin is really important. So that was tenet number one. What I want you to do now is I want you to take that blank sheet of paper, and I'll just give you 90 seconds. And then on the top left side of the piece of paper, you can see I've drawn here on the piece of paper on the screen. You can see on the bottom right, you can see that there are some lines. So if you go to the top left of your white piece of paper, write down the reasons for your change. List the objectives, the project objectives, but also some of the organizational benefits that you're hoping will come out of this change. And if you do have time and you want some extra grades on this one, then think about what is the value of having clarity and alignment around the reasons for success. What are the consequences if you do not have those alignments? Okay, so I'll give you 90 seconds to do that right now, and then we'll skip to the next tenet. So write down what are some of the project objectives, what are the reasons for your change, and also the benefits. Why have this been put in place? What are you hoping to achieve? And if you don't know, guess. Or what would my sponsor say to that question? Just give you 10 more seconds. And how important is it that you have an internal alignment about these reasons? Perfect. Great. So that's 90 seconds up. I hope that was something that you did. You captured some of the reasons for the change. You're considering the objectives, the benefits, the results, the outcomes. So when we get to the end of this session, then hopefully you'll have a piece of paper with all of the input from these 5 tenets. Okay, thanks for playing along. So tenet number 2 is that organizational change requires individual change. And the plain language question is, who has to do their job differently and how? Because in the end, organizations don't change, individuals do, or people do. Certainly the organization nudges in a particular direction, it adapts, it adjusts, but it can only change through individuals showing up in a new way, individuals showing up and executing their job or their role or their work and their contribution to the organization in a new way. So we talk about projects at an organizational level, implementing an ERP system, installing electronic medical records, moving to a hybrid workplace, merging 2 departments into one. So that's often how we talk about projects is that we talk about them at an organizational level. But here's the kicker. Each organizational change ultimately impacts how specific people do their job and where the change comes to life. So I used to use the old legacy system. Now I'm using the new integrated system. Or I used to do what I needed to do. Now I'm following a new process. Or I used to report to X. Now I'm reporting to Y. It is individuals that are making their own transition from a current state through the transition to the future state that results in the organizational outcomes. So the true unit of change is actually really the individual. Now, we looked at the current, transition, and future at the organizational level, but the reality is that change comes to life one person at a time. It is me showing up in a new way. It is me bringing the initiative to life if I'm an impacted person by this change, by showing up in a new way. It is really, most changes is really about changing people's work habits. And because we've all tried now, it's getting near the end of December, and this is when we make New Year's resolutions and we want to do all of these new things. And I think so we know that changing a habit is really hard. If you want to quit that smoking, you want to do more exercise or climb that mountain or whatever, you know how hard it is to change a habit. And that is what we do. We ask people to change their habits. Now, Prosci took this one step further and introduced these 10 aspects of change impact to help bring the definition to what does that actually mean? What does it mean for how you have to show up differently? So these 10 aspects describe components of somebody's job that your initiative may or may not impact. Are you going to impact the processes of that this person or this group need to follow? Are you going to impact the system that this person is using, or the tools, or the job roles? Will you be impacting the critical behavior laying behind this person being successful in his or her job? Are there any mindset or attitudes or beliefs that will need to be changed? And these last two, by the way, are interlinked often. Are you changing anything in the reporting structure? Will I need to report to somebody new, or will you change the way that we're set up organizationally? Are the performance reviews, are the part of my performance review that will change as part of this? Will some of my KPIs change? Will what you measure me on change? Will the compensation change, or the way that we calculate my bonus, will that change? Or finally, the location, is that going to change? So what we can do is that we basically, an initiative is not going to affect all groups in the same way. So by splitting people into groups and then going through these 10 different aspects, we can be clearer on who has to do their job differently and how. So what we can do, so over on the right-hand side of the screen, here, what you can see is we have these 4 circles color-coded that shows the degree of impact of a particular change on 4 different impacted groups. So if we're rewriting our expense reporting system or putting in a brand new expense reporting system, then if I'm an employee that submits my expense reports once a quarter, well, then this is probably not affecting me very much. But if for some people, let's say sales, the sales team, they are out and about all of the time. They're traveling quite a bit. Now, filling their expense reports, they're doing that every week. And this is going to be a pretty significant change for them. So, and for the person in accounting or finance who are processing all of our expenses, also, they may have to do their job very differently as a back of this. So you can see that we can get different profiles of how people will be doing things differently. So who is going to be impacted and how will help us understand this second tenet. And actually this next page here, this is one of my favorite tools. It's a very, very simple table. It's got 11 rows and it's got 4 columns, and we call this the yesterday tomorrow exercise. Now, if I take a particular group and I say, let's say I'm rolling out a new CRM, a customer relationship management system, and I'm going to look at my account managers. How did their processes look before? And what are they going to look like after this change? What about their systems? What about their tools? What about their job roles? So taking these 10 aspects of change, impact, and really using them as a filter for making sense of the individual change, that's the value that we're going to start to bring when we're starting to address 10 and 2 more directly. So 10 and 2, the plain language question is, who is going to be impacted by the change and how? So I'm going to give you 90 seconds again to try to, on the right-hand side, top right-hand side of your blank piece of paper, list a couple of groups that are going to be impacted by the change, and consider which of the job aspects will have the greatest impact. So you won't have time to go through all of them, but you just write down the group, and then on these 10 aspects, you can see them here under the consider, write which of these 10 aspects will be mostly affected by this group because of this change. So I'll give you 90 seconds to jot that down, and then we'll continue after that. And a group, really think of the groups in terms of different groups that will be impacted differently. So one group might be HR, one might be sales, one might be manufacturing, or it could be that HR will be impacted differently. So you might have to split HR into HR development, HR recruitment, HR, compensation or something. And then for each of these groups, which of these impacts, which of these aspects of each impacted group will have the greatest impact? Is it the processes? Is it reporting structure? Is it location? And this allows us to understand who will be impacted and how. So 10 more seconds. Right, so I'll call time. And again, what this allows, so basically when you do this sort of as a tool, what you do is you take each of the groups and then you score on all these 10 aspects, and you score from 0 to 5 to get a very clear understanding is who it is that will have to do the job differently and how. Right, so tenet number 3, organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. And the plain language question is, how much of our outcomes depends on adoption and usage? So to build out tenet number 3, we'll begin with a quote from Vince Lombardi. He's a legendary sort of a football coach and general manager of American football team, Green Bay Packers. And what he said was that the achievements of an organization are the results of the combined effort of each individual. Now, I know he was talking about American football, but that also holds true for organizations as well. I mean, think about that for our organization, for our projects, for our initiative. The results, the achievements of rolling out Microsoft Teams, or creating a CMO, or setting up a new CRM system, or merging 2 divisions and so on. All of that is the result of the combined effort of each individual. So take a look. We sort of kind of laid this out, the concept already, with the current, transition, and future state. So there is an organizational one, but ultimately it requires individuals to move through their own current, through their own transition, and to reach their own future state. But if we don't do change management well, we will lose people along the way. And if we don't do it well at all, we will lose a lot of people along the way. And that's what is change management is bringing to the table, is understanding that we will only get the benefits if we get as many people through to the future state. But if we don't do change management well, we will lose people along the way. So the people side of change is really what sits behind, between requirement and results and outputs and outcomes and specifications and sustainment and installation and realization. That is the people side of the change. So we don't help people and engage with people and adoption usage for the change. We will end up with a beautifully designed solution. As Diego mentioned in the beginning, we will end up with a beautifully designed solution, but create no value for the organization, because organizational outcomes are the collective results of each of those individuals impacted by the change. So I'll give you two examples that brings sort of this point home, which is that there are people dependent portion of the ROI of any product or any initiative that we're implementing. They're going to be people dependent portion, but it's different from each initiative. So the question at the bottom of this slide is how much of the expected ROI depends on adoption and usage. So if we look at these two projects, so we install motion activated lights in meeting rooms. Now, back when we eventually are going to all be back in our shared space again, how people dependent on that? Well, certainly somebody's got to install them and configure it, right? But after that, if I walk in the door, the lights go on, and when I leave, the lights go off. So the energy saving from that solution is really not dependent on my adoption and usage. Now, if you took a look at the one on the right-hand side, we install recycling compost bins in our office. Now, what percentage of that value depends on people adopting and usage change? Well, that's a tremendous amount, right? Because if I decide to throw the can into the trash instead of the recycle, we're not going to get the value that we're hoping to get out of this. And this is where the key question comes in. As part of the change management ROI work we're doing for our project, what percentage of overall results and outcomes depends on employee adoption and usage of the change? Because the adoption and contribution, that is what we're going to call that figure. The adoption contribution, especially for our most important changes, is much, much more significant. It's a huge portion of the value that we're trying to achieve. And now here comes the follow-up question, and this is sometimes called the punch in the gut question, which is how much are we investing out of our budget, out of our people, out of our resources, out of our energy and effort? How much are we investing in driving and supporting employee usage and adoption? And the answer there is often troubling. I mean, and this is the cognitive dissonance that we're trying to create. While 70% of what I'm trying to achieve out of this initiative is dependent on adoption, I'm only investing, let's say, 3% of it in making that happen. So if I've set, 500 euros aside for coffee mugs and some mouse pads, that's not going to drive the adoption and usage that we need to capture the people-dependent return on investment. So that's the way we're going to continue to build out our tenant. The organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. It is the individual adoption and usage that drives achievement of people-dependent return on investment. So grab that blank piece of paper again, and I'm going to give you about a minute on this. So you can see 3. You have that at the center here of the blank piece of paper. You can see that at the bottom right-hand side of my screen here. So here I want you to connecting the people to the results. So you're going to identify the potential costs and the risks to the change if the adoption and usage does not line up with what we expected. If we're going to get a poor adoption and usage, what are the costs and the risks to that change, to that initiative that you're considering? And on the right-hand side of the paper, you're going to estimate what percentage of expected results and outcomes that depends on people changing, how they do their jobs. So come up with an estimate of that percentage. If you want some extra credit, then consider how each group are contributing to that outcome. So you identified some groups up in on the top right-hand corner. So think a little bit about how each of those groups contribute to the to the adoption and usage of the change. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds to go through that right now. Great. So another 10 seconds. So write down some of the potential costs, the potential risks of poor adoption and usage, and then write down what percentage of the expected results do you think are coming from this? Okay, great. So we're going to move on to tenet number 4. And I'm going to highlight a point that I made in the beginning. So tenet number 1, 2, and 3, I haven't even mentioned change management yet, right? Tenet number 1, 2, and 3 are all about describing the reality of change, right? That it requires individual change, that the outcomes that we achieve are dependent on the collective results of those individual changes. We've never once mentioned change management, and that's really the power of the 5 tenets in terms of positioning and connecting what it is we do. So tenet number 4 is now where we introduce the change management as the solution to the reality of how change happens. Change management, that's the enabling framework for managing the people side of change. And the plain language question is, what will we do to support adoption and usage? So the unfortunate reality is that this is how most organizations attempt to support adoption and usage. That's an email on Monday, for training on Tuesday, for go live on Wednesday. And that's not the way to prepare, equip, and support individuals for successful change. That's not the way to capture the people-dependent return on investment. That's not the way to avoid the cost and the risks associated with poor adoption and usage. And so change management is going to be the solution that we're going to use to the reality of how change comes to life. It's the application of a structured desired outcome. That's what it is at the project and in initiative level. Now, we certainly know that it's a little bit bigger than that as well. We know that at an organizational level, it's a leadership competency for enabling change. And that leadership competency can be grown into an organizational to sort of that it happens everywhere, from top to bottom to left to right, that we start to build these individual skills to help an agent to help people to become an agent of change. So when people understand their role and understand how they contribute to more successful change at an organizational level, then it also becomes a competitive source of a competitive advantage. It becomes a differentiator for us, a core competency that lets us be more agile and more responsive. So this is the definition of change management that we use. And those of you who have been on the 3-day certification program that we run, you also know that this is the one that we use on that 3-day certification, that on a project level, it is the application of a structured process, a set of tools, leading the people side of change to achieve a desired outcome. So that's how we define change management and how we're going to bring it to life. So and we're going to look at these 2 pieces, the outcomes desired and the activities required. So what are the outcomes desired? Tenet number 2 and tenet number 3 tells us that change happens one person at a time. So the outcomes that we desire is that each individual who has to do the job differently in a new way is being affected, have sufficiently adapted and proficiently use the solution that we want to work with. And we're going to use the Prosci ADCA model to do this. the ADKAR model. Those of you who know me well know that this is by far the favorite model of all that I know. So we're going to use the ADKAR model in order to drive the outcomes desired. To help us describe and understand the outcomes desired, as I said, we're going to use the ADKAR model. The activities required are the activities that we do as change practitioners, you and me, to support the initiative. So what are we going to do? And as that happens, we have to put that into context and as a process and by a system through specific levers. And we're going to unpack that in a second. So we're going to use that in order to drive the outcomes that we're looking for. And the ADKAR is Prosci's process, individual change model. It's an acronym that you will see sort of big answers over to the left here. This is where you can see that there's 5 ADKAR elements: the A, the K, AR, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. Now, awareness is something that you have. The definition is awareness of the need for the change, and that's in place when you will hear the people who are impacted by the change will say, I understand why we're doing this. Desire is a desire to participate and support the change. And here you will see we are there when people are saying we have decided to. Knowledge on how to change is when people will say, I know how to. Ability is to implement required skills and behaviors when people are saying, I am able to. And finally, reinforcement to sustain the change is that I will continue to follow the new process or the new systems and so on. So this is ADKAR on a page, and this is basically where we talk about, this is what needs to be in place in order to have the outcomes desired. We have recently actually done a webinar on ADKAR. If you are interested in knowing more about the ADKAR model and how to use it and how it's built in the background, then go on our website on nexum.eu and find the replay for that particular one. So the ADKAR gives us the outcome desired. That's a powerful thing. And it helps us understand how one person makes a transition. So it helps us define success at that individual level. But if a change is impacting a team of 5 or a work group of 20 or a department of 1,000, then we also can use the ADKAR model to understand how do they go through their individual change journeys? How do they go through awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement? So they can say that I understand, that I have decided to, and I know how to, and I'm able to, and I will continue to. So we have achieve the successful change. And ADKAR also helps us understand the individual nature of those journeys. We each start at different points in time and moving through the ADKAR, and it takes us different amounts of time to move through the different ADKAR elements. Some people, they go on a quick e-learning module, takes 15 minutes, and they have built knowledge. For other people, it takes a longer time because this is really difficult for them to learn this new skill. So they might have to use days or weeks or months in order to learn it. So we move at different pace. And the goal is to ensure that people are ready to use this when we need to. And the way we achieve that is through the activities of change management. The activities begin in a context. Change management doesn't happen in a vacuum. Change management happens relative to the 3 other elements of a successful initiative. Successful change has a governance and a direction, basically set by our leadership and sponsorship. It has project management leg of the stool. We sometimes use a stool as a metaphor for this PCT and a PCT model. So the project management leg of the stool is basically the technical side where we design, develop, and deliver the right solution. And we also have change management, which are responsible for the people side. And finally, we have a reason for change. That was what we defined in tenet number 1. So the PCT models gives us context for how change management relates to the other components of the project. So the activity requires happen in a process as well as the three-phase process. And this is where we have the three-phase process. Some of you may be familiar with the Prosci three-phase methodology. Those of you who've been on the 3-day certification course certainly have. But if you're not familiar with it, also we have a webinar on that, and that will unfold you. But the methodology, the process that Prosci is bringing to the world, so to speak, is basically this three-phase methodology. And by following that process is how we get the activities to come to life. Now, the activities required happen in a context, they happen in a process, but they also happen by a system. And the change practitioner is only really one, the change practitioner is us, and they're only one of the 4 roles that we identify in this system that brings to life the people side of change. So we know that the employee-facing roles is from the research is basically somebody at the top and somebody that I report to. The sponsor has a role of being active and visible participant throughout the entire project to build a coalition of sponsorship with peers and managers and to communicate directly with employees. The nearest manager or the people manager or supervisor, whatever we call them, have 5 different roles that we want to be active. We want them to activate throughout a time of change. And that is to be a communicator, a liaison, an advocate, and resistant manager, and a coach. And then we have 2 enabling roles, and that's the change practitioner, that's us, and then the project manager. The change practitioner is really there to apply the structure and the systems and to enable and equip the people and the employee-facing roles. But then it is also to collaborate with the project manager, like it is important for the project manager to collaborate with the change practitioner. So we basically need all of these 4 roles to collaborate in order to make this come alive. So in context, as a process, as a systems, we use specific levers to make this come to life. We use a sponsored roadmap to outline what we need from those senior leaders. We need a communication plan, not just a telling plan to send but a communication plan to send those right messages to the right audiences at the right time through the right sender, through the right channels. We need to build a coaching plan where we help our people managers know how to engage with their direct reports and how they're supporting them to change. We need a training plan because we need to make sure that they have the right skills, all of the skills required in order to change and also to be able to work after the change has been implemented. And finally, we need a resistance management plan so we can proactively identify where's resistance coming from and how can we prevent it. So also we will respond, so we can respond to that resistance when it comes. So the activities required happens in a context, as a process, by a system, but also through specific levers. And if we can get all of these, I should have built this out as I was speaking to it. So if we can get all of those pieces in place and moving in the right direction, then we can basically impact the individuals as we want. Again, change management is an enabling framework for helping individuals through their change journey. And we use ADKAR as a way to understand the desired outcome, and we use our activities to drive that outcome. So I'll just give you a minute on this one. And on the bottom left hand, you to note down a couple of things. Answer these questions. Are you using a structured approach? And think about your particular initiative that you're thinking about. Are you using a structured approach for the people side of change right now? Is it scaled? Is it customized? Who do we have dedicated resources? Do we have dedicated resources? Who do we have budget for it, or are we aligned with best practices? So write down those. I'll give you 60 seconds just to write down the answers to this. It's the bottom left-hand side, and then we'll move on. So how is your current change management approach? Maybe you made a structured approach yourself, you built it in-house, or maybe you adopted an external one, maybe Prosci. Do you have a budget for this? Remember the key question, how much of the total project cost is connected with change management? Right. Great. So minutes up. So hopefully you've jotted down a few notes on how you are approaching this at the moment. If your answers to all of these are no, we don't have a structured approach, we don't have any budget, we're not aligning it with best practice, any of that, you might want to consider what difference would it make if we did, or if we just should take one little step in order to add something, what might that be, and what difference would that make? So think a little bit about that, and then we'll move on. Great. So tenet number 5, we apply change management. We apply change management to realize the benefits and desired outcomes of change. How will driving adoption and usage improve results? So we're going to close the loop between what we had in tenet number 1 is that we change for a reason, and now that we're saying that we are driving adoption and usage in order to get these reasons, these results, so to speak. Because the ability to successfully deliver an organizational benefits and on project objectives is directly impacted by how effectively we manage the people side. I'll give you the bottom line up front here for tenet number 5, that we apply change management to, and the whole menu here. So the menu of why we apply change management: to improve the likelihood of change outcomes, to meet or exceed project objectives, to minimize negative consequences, to reduce costs, and so on. And I'm just going to go through some of these with you already, so we can sort of build up why are we doing this. The first is that we apply change management to improve the likelihood of change outcomes and to achieve results on time and on budget. Prosci has about 5,000-6,000 data points now sitting behind these correlations. And it basically says that the better we do change management, the more likely we are to meet objectives. So if we can go from poor to excellent change management, we get a 6-fold bump in terms of likelihood of meeting objectives. And we get a 3-fold bump, by the way, if we're moving from poor to fair. Also, on or ahead of schedule or on or below budget is also impacted greatly how well we do change management. So we apply change management to improve the likelihood of change outcomes. We also apply change management to mitigate the consequences of the Swiss cheese future state. So we saw from the picture earlier that the Swiss cheese future state looks like if we don't help individuals get through their own future state. And it's about if people don't get to their own future state, but collectively it erodes the value of the project. We get lower ROI, we have history of failed changes, we have unachieved improvements, and it simply wasn't what we expected for. We also apply change management to minimize negative consequences. All of the frustration, all of the failure, all of the resistance, all of the confusions, all of the loss of morale, and so on. These are some of the negative consequences that we get if we don't do change management well. And again, so we apply change management to minimize the negative consequences. We also apply change management to reduce costs and risks, because we know that if we don't do adoption and if we don't support adoption and usage, there are excess costs and avoidable risks that we've taken on the initiative at the individual and the project level and at the organizational level. Take by excess costs and additional risks that we didn't need to take on. So if we paid attention to our people, then we would have avoided all of these. A lot of those are based on these costs that are written down at the bottom of this slide. So rework, redo, retrain, redesign, and so on. So that's basically that we apply change management to reduce costs and risks. We also apply change management to drive the people side outcome variables. So the variables like the speed of adoption, how quickly are people up and running on the new systems, processes, and job roles. Ultimate utilization, how many employees are demonstrating buy-in and are using the new solutions. And proficiency, how well are individuals performing compared with the level expected in the design of the change. So we apply change management to improve the speed of adoption, ultimate utilization, and proficiency, because that drives return on investment. So we apply change management to capture the people-dependent return on investment, because in the end, that's what it's all about. It's capturing that people-dependent return on investment on our initiatives. We apply change management to capture it, because remember, the most important strategic changes, that is a significant portion of our total return on investment for our project. That's the people-dependent part. And that is the results and outcomes. And the only reason we do change management is to drive better results and outcomes on the change initiatives that we have already invested in, that we have already taken on. So it's helping our senior leaders, our project managers, our organization to achieve what they already signed up for. So want to do the final one, you can see the summary slide here, is I'll give you just 1 minute to capture some of these impacts on the bottom right hand corner here. And I just want you to think, what are some of the value that you can create when you do a great job in preparing, equipping, and supporting people through the change that they experience? And consider the ones that we've been through now, the likelihood of change outcomes, the being on time and on budget, meeting objectives, reducing costs, capturing the people-dependent ROI. So let's give you a minute to write down what value can you bring by bringing change management to the table for this particular case. Right, I'm giving you far too little time, but those of you who know me well know that I am always a time optimist, and I always hope that I can put in more in these webinars that I can. But just to finish off, these are the 5 tenets, and this is what it's all about. These are our underlying assumptions. This is what we believe to be true in the space of change management. We believe that we change for a reason. We believe that organizational change requires individual change. We believe that organizational outcomes are the collective results of individual change. We believe that change management is an enabling framework for managing the people side of change. We believe that we apply change management to realize the benefits and desired outcomes of change. So that's our fundamental belief. And everything you do, whether you use a structured approach, whether you use Prosci or not, however way you do this, these are some of the fundamentals belief behind change management. So there are 2 minutes until we are at 2 p.m. I will stick around for a couple of questions. If you have any questions, you're also very welcome to write to me. I'll be very happy to share them, or you can write them in chat and we'll capture them as well. But that was really all for me. Diego, are there any questions coming in?
Yes, thank you, Morten. So we received some questions. The first one is related to the ADKAR model. So the question is, in which cases are the ADKAR model not suitable as the chosen change management framework?
Wow. I am not going to say that there is a time when ADKAR can never be used, because I think it's the best tool in the world. I think it can be used most times, and I think I literally think, but I know there are times when it's harder to use it. So for instance, if you're not allowed to reach out to employees or ask employees, or they are in so many different places scattered around that it's too difficult to actually measure it, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to get insights on where are we on awareness, where are we on desire, and therefore use it as a way to measure. I will definitely say when you are training your organization, your people, maybe use some different words, and if that acronym doesn't work for you, that's fine. But talking about how can we make sure that people understand what it is we're trying to achieve? How can we get people motivated to be on this journey? And I still think that is a great way of talking about a change in any organization. If the words themselves stand in the way, or if ADKAR is an acronym that doesn't work in your particular organization, or if you already have a framework or a language internally, then use that by all means. But the idea behind it, that you have to go through an individual change journey, I think is a really powerful and universal one, I have to admit.
Thank you, Morten. Maybe one last question. So we have someone in the room familiar with the Kotter's 8 steps. So the question is a comparison between the Kotter model and the ADKAR model. So would you say that Kotter's model is geared more toward leadership, and ADKAR model toward the general population, meaning the change?
I mean, I think we owe Kotter a lot. He really put change management on the map before there was a map, and this was in the early 90s. He came with his first model, which was an eight-step model, which started off with you must have a burning platform, and there are some systems built around that. He, around a couple of years ago, came out with a new book and a new article in Harvard Business Review, where he basically said, I don't think that works anymore. I think the whole thing with the burning platform, I think we need to be really careful about that. And I think that the old Kotter model really must be understood and read in that new context. What I will say about the Kotter model is that it works really well at a very executive level. And I think that's probably the level where it works best. When you're sitting in a project, I think I can see that there are some tools that you need to supplement that framework with, I would say, because there are certain part of managing a project down to an individual level, I think is a little bit difficult. But I think we owe a lot in terms of communication and in terms of putting change management on the map, talking about the importance of change management. I think we owe that to the 8-step of the Kotter model. Practically, it's a little bit harder to use in some ways. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Morten, and thank you very much to all of you for being here with us today. So unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time. So if you still have questions, do not hesitate to contact Morten or to contact me. You will see our email addresses on the slides. So please note that this webinar's recording and slides will be made available on our websites in the early days of next week. So feel free to share it with possibly interested colleagues or friends or even family members. So for those who are willing to dig deeper into the topic, I can only encourage you to visit our blog on our website, so www.nexum.eu. And I would also like to take this opportunity to ask you not to forget to fill in the very short satisfaction survey that you will receive in the email you will receive from us tomorrow. In this message, you will also we will provide you some additional readings about the topic of today. And if you would like to be kept up to date with our training programs or publication or webinars, simply subscribe to our newsletter from our website homepage or follow us on LinkedIn. Finally, please note that the dates of our first webinars for 2023 will be published during the second week of December. So, well, it only remains for me to wish you an excellent end of day, wonderful weekend, and a happy end of year. So see you soon.
Yeah, have a fantastic weekend. Bye, all of you.
Bye-bye.